This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 50.
What they had was what I'd like to call the basics. So they had guides, job aids, and checklists and things like that that were primarily developed by operators. So people who are working in stores, general managers, and things like that. And they were looking to take it to the next level of how can we now become a much more digital company in regards to reaching our overall audience. And part of that, of course, included we want better retention, we want better employee engagement, and obviously we want to attract even better talent.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast from lmspulse.com. My name's Laddick. To celebrate our 50th episode, how about a pizza party? My guest for today is Joe Dunlap, who's the Director of Learning and Development at Topper's Pizza, a Wisconsin-based chain of restaurants with owned and franchised locations across the United States. With an incredible background, including a 4-year run consulting about learning at none other than NASA, Joe has a critical mission. As Topper's Pizza bounces back from the blow of COVID-19 and reinvents itself, its technology and the way it engages partners and franchisees. In this delicious conversation, Joe and I talk about what it's like to work and learn at NASA and why even rocket engineering teams are fond of design thinking and agile project management approaches. We also talk about why it makes a lot of sense that a former NASA consultant is now leading learning operations at a pizza place that's figuring out a few groundbreaking launches themselves. And we talk about, of course, the clear cultural differences between these and other organizations Joe has been with. So we talk about the challenge of translating learning experiences to increase their effectiveness. And then finally, we talk about the TikTok generation, which makes up the bulk of learners under his wing right now, and how he uses technology to deliver an interactive, timely, and amenable learning that fosters creativity and problem solving. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the e-learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Joe. Welcome to the e-learning podcast. How are you today?
I'm great, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Where do I find you sitting today?
So I'm actually at home, working from home today, but I live in Wisconsin and I work for Topper's Pizza.
Nice. Yeah. So what part of Wisconsin?
So I am just northwest of Milwaukee, and Topper's is located or headquartered in Whitewater, Wisconsin, which is about an hour southwest of where I live.
And give us a sense, how big is Topper's? I mean, is this a national chain? Is this I admittedly, everybody knows who's listening. I live in Mexico, so I don't know what Topper's Pizza is.
It's roughly a little more than 70 stores. We are a nationwide chain. We're primarily in the Midwest, though we do have locations in the Carolinas, in Texas, and in Colorado as well. And so we are expanding our network, and that is part of our overall strategic plan over the next couple of years, is to eventually get to 200 stores nationwide.
Wow. I don't even know what 200 stores would feel like. That's awesome. Fantastic. Joe, you are you're the Director of Learning and Development there.
Yes, I am.
I've teed you up in the introduction to the podcast here to sort of give a little background, but why don't you give us the 30 seconds, the 1 minute on where you came from? Who are you? Why are you now the Learning Director at Topper's?
Oh, I've had a pretty diverse background. So I started off like probably most of your viewers and people who also speak to you, as I started off doing stand-up facilitation. I was creating e-learning. I was using PowerPoints. And so this is right around 2000. And then, of course, e-learning emerged, right? So now we've got e-learning authoring tools. We have learning management systems. And I was that kid in the candy store. I was always willing to try something. So when our Director of Learning Development at that time came forward and said, we want to start trying this, I was raising my hand. Yeah, let me in it. And as its presence grew, as the use of e-learning and learning management systems grew, I grew a team underneath me and eventually became a team leader and team manager. And then that just led me on the path of where I am today. And so my wife would love to tell you that I have the bad habit of landing in the right place at the wrong time. And so as I've moved from different organizations, they've been challenged by certain things, whether it be technology, performance improvement, whatever else. And I seem to land there, and I embrace those opportunities of, okay, we've got these challenges that we need to overcome. What can we do? And along that way, I've been learning so many different things with regards to how businesses run, processes and methods and cultures and things like that. And it's only benefited me and my growth as well to kind of change and broaden my entire outlook on how learning and development works within the organization.
I, I don't have a follow-up to that. I think we're done right there. That was
Right.
the master class. Thank you very much.
Right.
No.
Well, if I wanted to throw a real good one in there, I did. I was actually working for NASA for a couple years, which is probably where it really took off for me at that time, because this was prior to the digital transformation. So we were just in the early stages of that. And of course, you're working at NASA, you're seeing things that haven't even really come across people's minds from a commercial use standpoint. And I'm getting to play with these technologies, and I'm getting to work with these people who develop these technologies. And that's where I started learning things like agile and lean startup and design thinking, because these methodologies and processes were in use at NASA. And so that's what really helped me to really start to grow in learning development, start looking beyond our traditional processes like ADDIE and SAM and things like that to other methods.
I will admit that that was a little bit of surprise for me. Like, one thinks of NASA, one does not think agile, one does not think sprints, one does not think, lean development. That's interesting.
It is, because what a lot of people don't know about NASA is there's 13 centers spread across the United States, and they all have particular research focus or focuses. And so, the traditional way is they might spend months or years working on something. And by embracing agile, they're testing out their hypothesis, right? Design thinking, lean startup. They're testing out an idea to see if it truly can work, and is it viable and feasible at the same time. So what they were doing is they were working within the budget, and really small budgets at this time, to move forward. What was going to be the next iteration of NASA? So this is the end of the space shuttle program, and they're kind of looking for, where's our next home going to be? And so there's all these ideas coming forward, and they were exploring these in very small segments to see if there was something that resonated with an audience, especially when we talk about federal government, that they could move forward on. Yeah.
Oh, super cool. Well,
yeah,
I feel like that's another podcast episode that we need to have, to be honest with you.
But I could talk about NASA for days.
Maybe we'll have to. That is awesome. I had no idea, because I found you, and when we connected, you are, the way that you kind of characterize yourself is, you were starting up an L&D department for Topper's Pizza, right? So as you said, I think 74, 75 stores. This is a decent sized company. And they didn't have a learning department. Like, how long has this been around? And like, now you're the guy who's supposed to set up a learning department. I'm really interested in, why wasn't this something that was set up before?
They had what I'd like to call the basics. So they had guides, job aids, and checklists and things like that were primarily developed by operators. So people who are working in stores, general managers, and things like that. And they were looking to take it to the next level of, how can we now become a much more digital company in regards to reaching our overall audience. And part of that, of course, included, we want better retention, we want better employee engagement, and obviously we want to attract even better talent. So the CEO, recognizing that, said, okay, we need to start embracing the technologies that not only are my employees using today, but also our future employees. What are they using? How do we attract them? How do we now make Toppers a more fun place to work that is more congruous to what people are actually used to using in their everyday life, right? So developing a proprietary operating system, but fortunately for me, the vice president of operations recognized that part of that model we need to now grow our overall learning and development presence and become more standardized across all those stores, right? And so Toppers is two entities in one. It's a corporate side, and they own several stores, and then there's franchises as well. So now you're working with two different audiences, one that's kind of more under the umbrella of Topper's Pizza, and then you have franchisees that work more on the standards because they're actually operating a franchise for us. And so you're trying to find the happy medium of working with all these groups, allowing these cultures to exist separate of each other, but you're trying to provide training to them all at the same time, recognizing that these different cultures do exist, these different methods do exist, and how do we now make this work for everybody? And there's a lot of engagement that occurs as part of that process.
So the first place I want to start there is, have you done this before? I mean, is this the first time you stood something? You said you were a team leader or manager before, but have you ever started from scratch and like said, okay, here, this is how we do this?
Yeah, it is. It's the third time I've done this in my career over the past 20 years. This is the first time I've done this for a retail food and beverage organization. But even though the business is different, standing up the learning and development team has been somewhat similar in the sense of what I've had to do is step back and look across the organization. Where is it going? What is its overall strategy? So, my first time around this was in the early 2000s. And so e-learning and learning management systems and tools like that were just starting to take off. And so I'm looking for the type of people who embrace technology and want to use these things. And we're looking at learning and development, especially when we talk about e-learning, as now the foundation as we move away from instructor-led. And then my second iteration was again at NASA. So now that's part of a cultural transformation that was going on that I had to kind of step back from, is that we can no longer think in the traditional sense of how we provided learning, because NASA was now trying to find itself and where was it going to be post the shuttle era. And so we now need to embrace different ways of delivering learning and performance support across all 13 centers, knowing that there were these different focuses going on. And then now my third iteration of this is now at Toppers, in which they have great material. But what you didn't have was an understanding of how it was being applied and what were the performance measures around that. So we certainly have measures that we can measure from a store perspective, from a management perspective, but what you don't know is what's missing in that. Why do some people perform very well and some don't? And that's part of my new role, is really working as closely as I can with our frontline employees, with our frontline general managers, to understand what are their best practices and how can we now curate knowledge as well as create knowledge and practice across the entire organization.
So where does one start? So I mean, did it feel like, okay, now the CEO calls you and you cut your deal and you're good to go, and he's like, hey, great, there's the deep end of the pool, go for it. Or what's walk us through, like what would one do? What's your first step? Like, how do you start this?
So part of my lessons learned from my first iteration is it's an experiment for me. So I didn't walk into creating these two learning and development teams with the idea that I'm going to hire everybody who has a bachelor's degree in instructional design or something to that effect. It was looking at that culture and then proposing internships, really, with our CEO or my director at the time, with the second time that I actually tried this. Is what I was trying to do was generate the interest and the volume of work first to prove that this was a necessary role. So as an example, in my last time I stood up a team, I actually brought in some interns from local universities. One young lady was a master's in library science. So she was getting a master's in library science. I needed somebody who could manage content, right? So she could look across all that and understand how to organize it, categorize it, and make it available. And then my three other interns were actually communication interns at a local university. And my proposal to them was that there's 1,000 stories in this organization. Let's go find these stories and figure out what resonates, that is a pain point across the organization from a performance standpoint. And let's start going after these stories. And first, the idea is to generate interest and understand how big of a story is this? How many people does it impact? And do we have enough there to really turn this into a learning and development program? The fun thing for me about that, and again, it was just an experiment on my part, was I brought these young people in, and in my brain, I'm thinking 3 to 4 week learning curve before they really get to working. Well, Stephen, they just blew that all to hell, because they were within 1 week. They're doing work. They're organizing stuff. They're getting stories. They're publishing it. They were used to these technologies that I was still trying to grasp. They were using these like this on their phone, and stuff. And it just blew me away. And it took off because now we were truly hitting our learners in a way that they wanted to learn. And
give me a concrete example of that, either at Toppers or in a previous iteration, because I love this. Well, let's start that. Let's start with a real concrete example there, where it's just like, look, we just kind of had this smorgasbord of guides and checklists and I can still see the 3-ring binder when I worked at Domino's, literally 35 years ago. You still have them. I know they're in the laminated thing so they don't get greasy, that everybody knows that. But like, so you've got all this stuff, and then you're like, okay, but like, give me a real specific example of here's like a learning path that came out or something like that.
Absolutely. So, great example when I first joined Topper. So this is back in February of this year, and I'm looking at their manager and training program, and it's made up of 4 pillars, 4 cores, right? So we talk about our brand, we talk about operations, cost control, and people development. And so I'm looking at this overall program, and I'm understanding the scope of each one of these 4 pillars. And I took a stab and I went out to the supervisors and general managers and I said, give me a 1 to 2 minute video of your best practice underneath this pillar with this particular category. And I'm thinking, okay, let's see what happens. Within the first week, I had over 30 videos. Within 2 weeks, I had over 100 of best practices, right?
Wow.
And
Cool.
I'm looking at these videos and I'm cross comparing them to the content. And I'm going, these guys have taken this and really run with this idea. So they took a concept and they expanded on it for their operations. And so what it allowed me to do was now start putting these best practices around these pillars, these categories within the content that we had to show people, here's how it's applied by these general managers, by these frontline employees who are already top performers. So that way, other people, when they're in that moment of pain, so to speak, how can I improve this? How can we make this better? They now have the resource, but it resonates more with them because it's their peer. It's people they know. It might be the person that's 3 miles down the street in another Toppers and they're familiar with them. So it's these stories that resonate that I now get to build on. And so what's grown from that is I've now built these frontline communities around these pillars who are helping me to look at the content and redevelop all that. So I would tell you on my behalf, I'm creating maybe 30% of that content. The other 70% is coming from these frontline employees, and they're engaged because they want their best practices, their thoughts, their ideas shared. And it just has taken off. So that's an example of how that.
That's super cool. And so give us a sense as well, like of those, I'm just saying it, like, this is the Topper YouTube, right? Or the Vimeo or whatever, where it's, you're going to create a little bit of the content, but really this is user generated, right? And it's internal, right? So it's coming up. So is it 5% of the employees that get super engaged and they want to contribute? Is it 90%? Like, how many people are like, I've got a story and like, here's how I flip the bread or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I was very directed when I first started off this endeavor as I was hitting each store with one particular topic. I wanted mass contribution across all stores. I wasn't anticipating the kind of feedback that I got. I thought, I'm going to get, like you said, there's going to be some who really want to contribute, some are going to ignore me, but they were all very engaged. And so what that has done now is allowed anybody who has an idea and a phone or a laptop there at their location. And most of the stores, most of the employees have phones and they all have laptops as well, or iPads, that as they come across the best practice, or just thoughts or suggestions, they're now submitting. So I do see some who are probably higher performers than others who are contributing more. But I would still tell you that I probably have somewhere around a 70% contribution rate across all
70%.
Right. Yeah.
Holy smokes. That's
based on where I'm seeing.
That is ginormous compared to like some of the other stories I've heard where it's, it's like maybe 10% is a huge number for them, where it's great. But that 70, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this. Like, this is going to seem like a left turn, but I'm really interested in this. You bring in these interns, you bring in these people to start setting up this department and basically just get it going. How different is the experience that you're having at Toppers or in terms of learning, education, right, to what they're doing at university or what they're doing at their school? Like, do they come in there like, oh, thank God I actually get to do something? Or are they like, oh, hey, look, I pulled this from the class I was doing. Like, this is how we did it over there. Like, give me the juxtapose it for me.
Yeah, that's great. It's a little bit of both. So for them, especially with a lot of the interns that I'm bringing in, they've actually had some of this practice. So really, I'm looking at juniors and seniors for the most part, because I want them to have some of that experience of producing this kind of content or doing this type of work. So they're bringing in ideas and technologies that I haven't really thought about in the way that they can be used. Vice versa, they're getting the experience of that book smarts versus the street smarts, so to speak.
Right, really makes
now,
impact.
how is this actually applied at work? And so they're getting that experience to help kind of break down the theory into, well, yeah, that's great on the book, but in real practice, this isn't going to work quite like that. So they're getting that experience as well, which they then turn around and bring back to their university. From what I'm understanding, and I actually did hear from one of the professors there who's been giving me some feedback on what he's been hearing from some of these interns in his class. So that relationship might grow between me and the university in terms of how we now maybe create this integrated curriculum with real practice going forward, especially if this really continues to take off and maybe I bring in more interns.
I guess, yeah, so take it to another level. Like I'm guessing that I'd love to hear some of the specific technologies maybe that these interns or whoever, just, I hate to say this way, but you and I, we both have gray hair, whatever. I admit it on the show all the time. I've been around for too long. Well, nah. But so what are they bringing in where it's just like, oh wow, I didn't know what Notion is. I didn't know, that we could use chatbots to do this. I didn't realize. Is it that kind of advanced, or is it like, hey, we've got an LMS and we just got to think of a different learning path, or there's a different speech pattern that they're using, or whatever? Like, what are the real you kind of got to get out of the way.
Yeah, it's funny. We don't even have a learning management system. So they brought in the idea of utilizing SharePoint, right? Because that's what
there's your LMS, use. Right?
There's your LMS, exactly. They're bringing in, and some of the fun ideas for me have been, like for instance, utilizing Twitter and TikTok. So these are two things that stand out for me. Is these very brief 1-minute pieces of conversation, right? So it's show me your best practice in a minute video. Right. And part of that has to do with just being able to send it back and forth between the stores and ourselves. I mean, there's only so much email capability that you can actually send in terms of file size. So what it then is kind of putting that back on the stores, that general manager or those employees, to say, what can you show me in a minute to a minute and a half in terms of best practice, right? So for instance, show us how fast you can make a pizza and put that in, right? So there's best practices in one of our measures, which is called load time. For the minute that pizza comes up on the screen, how fast can you get it done and in the oven, or how fast can you get it out the door, which is another measure for us. Local marketing techniques. What are you doing? So you hear about, for instance, some of our stores where they're reaching out to other local restaurants to come up with new ideas with regards to a menu, but they're also sharing their customer base as well, because now they're kind of conjoined in the sense of they're working collaboratively with one another to share some recipes, some ideas, and things like that. So it's the technology we use today. I mean, granted, some of the editing technology and things that they do use is a little foreign to me because I'm not used to using those. But overall, it's the way that they're using technology that you and I use in different ways that's really broadening my experience, because I might, let's go shoot a video, where now they're creating this TikTok and they're adding features and functions and filters and things like that really enhance that overall experience. And it's just resonating because, again, most of our employees are in that 17 to 22-year-old age group anyway. So these are the technologies they're using. And so it becomes fun for them. And now they're more engaged and want to contribute, as well as just paying attention when we're sending it out.
Super cool. Super cool.
Yeah.
What's been your, take me to this hasn't worked so well. What are, a couple of maybe here just at Toppers, like the big challenges that you've kind of run into that you didn't expect, or that you're really working through now?
The biggest challenge that I'm running into is that you kind of have two different groups, so to speak. So you have a group that has been around for a while, and they've kind of gotten used to their ways in terms of run their business, especially when we talk about the franchises. And then you have a younger group, or an early adopter group that's ready to try other things. And so as we look at the existing training, the existing learning that we have in place, it's hard to get everybody to the same place in terms of an agreement of how we need to move forward, because you have some people very well practiced, they're top performers, their way has worked for them a long time. They may not want to embrace something new, versus you have a younger audience that's ready to try newer things, and they're all on board with that. And so it's the challenge for me, of course, I'm ready to just let's go jump and try something, because again, I come from that agile design thinking background. Let's try something and see what happens and gauge that feedback and move forward with it. But I have to recognize again that there are people who have come into this business on their own free will. They've started a business here with Toppers, and you got to recognize the culture and what they've built up over time and respect that. and make sure that they have a voice at the table, and maybe do it in much smaller steps and smaller increments moving forward so that they can feel more comfortable as we start to go through this transition.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I want to go a little deeper on the franchise versus corporate owned stuff. And something I don't know about Toppers, is it an eat-in restaurant, or is this just like a delivery service?
It's a little bit of both. So we do have the capability of eating in, but it's really small. We're much more about delivery.
Okay.
Or
cool.
pickup. Yeah.
And so usually when I think of franchise, I think, hey, look, you're going to, again, get the binder, or at least get the, here's the corporate policies and this is what you have to do. And I would assume training would be something like that. So why, you've kind of characterized it that there's different personalities here in terms of, it feels like they can go at their own, go at their own pace, or going to have, kind of make it their own Toppers store. Is that it? Have I characterized that correctly? And
yes. Yeah. So when we think about the corporate side, and I hate to use this terminology, but it's the only thing I can think of, is that we can say, you need to do this.
Right.
Right. And so
Top
maybe
down.
yeah, exactly. So maybe there's a little flexibility. I am building that bottom up model for them as, okay, give me feedback on how this is working so I can make this a better experience. But truly, it's, you need to do this. Whereas on the franchise side, the whole model is really built on adhering to standards, right? So that's when franchisees come and join us. There's a contractual agreement with all that. And so there's standards that need to be in place that they need to meet, but there's not as much direction on how to get there, right? So you are leaving that opportunity for that franchisee to create their own culture, right? To kind of enhance training or modify training as they see fit. So we can certainly come out and recommend all the best practices in the world. It would give them that binder, like you said, and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they need to follow through on it, that they necessarily do it. They could come up with their own better way. And as long as they're meeting the standards that we measure, it is what it is at that particular point. So that's some of the balance that I have to deal with, is understanding that some of these stores have come up with their own way and that works, and I want them to share that. And what I'm trying to do is make sure, really underneath all this, is that I want, if you were to go to Toppers in Carolina and then come to Wisconsin, I want that experience to be as close to the same as possible.
Right.
Because all you need, and any franchise will tell you this, all you need is one bad franchise that ruins the reputation of all the other franchises. And now you have a customer, if they're moving, if they're talking, especially in the age of social media, that can really hurt your business. Right. So you want everybody's experience to be the same. You want everybody singing about that Toppers brand and the Toppers pizzas and things that we produce.
Interesting. Where do you go sort of next from here? So you've been doing this since February. You don't even have an LMS, which blows me away, which is great. No, honestly, I can't decide if I it is called LMS Pulse, for crying out loud. So we've been singing the praises of LMSs for a long time, but I just love how, especially over the last 14 months during the pandemic here, how we've just seen such radical change, these what I call leapfrog moments for companies, for schools, for individuals, and remote teams and whatnot. What are the things that you've learned at Toppers about delivery of training, about acceptance of it, and what where are you kind of pointing your North Star for the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, so the reason why we don't really have a learning management system that may be in our future is that really we need to deliver learning in the flow of work. So we have our own proprietary system, point of sale system. And so if you can envision a 72-inch TV screen that's up on the wall within a Toppers store, and that order comes in, what I want to do is get to the point from a learning development standpoint is, I don't want to train you necessarily on how to make a pizza, or if I do, I want to spend an hour training you on how to make a pizza. When that order comes up, I want you to be able to see all the ingredients, how much of an ingredient, and a video underneath it of how to make it and what it should look like. So that's what I'm trying to move to, is that when you're actually making that pizza, it's right there on the screen in front of you, and if you move it down and what we call bumping, now you've actually put it in the oven, the next order comes up and you know what those are. Because right now our system, and I spent 4 days making pizza myself, as I'm looking up at, laminated poster boards of each pizza and the measures, whatever else. And like you said, Stephen, I got a lot of gray. It's a little hard to read some of those posters from a distance. So I'm doing this, looking at it as closely as I can. And I have the general manager who's telling me, and I'm turning to her going, if you tell me, I'm not going to remember.
Right.
I need to learn this myself. And so that's kind of where that idea came from. And then because we have a proprietary system, how can we now build in even better moments where as they're working with that customer, there's help files. And so you may remember the days when the old Microsoft paperclip used to pop up and you were doing something in Word or Excel, right? We hated that, but it was brilliant. It was truly embedded learning at the time. I hated it. Trust me, I would turn it
Everyone
off.
hates it. Everyone thinks it was the lamest thing ever. But then here's the thing: we all use it now, or we all used it then, and this is exactly like, I mean, tell me what the little pop-up chat bot in the corner of your screen is. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what we're trying to do now is that as you're working with that customer order and whatever else, there's little things that are reminding you of, hey, they could have this or they should add this or things like that. So that way, that employee doesn't have to think as much through that entire process. They're getting fresher reminders for them. And eventually, at some point, it just becomes habitual for them and they're actually doing it. But along the way, it's that performance support that they may need to do that work. Because again, it is the pizza business like many restaurants. There's a lot of retention in terms of we have people who, we have a lot of turnover in the stores.
Yeah.
So you're always churning. Well, if I'm a general manager, I can't always be training because I'm trying to grow my business and make money. How can we now make it easier for them? So that's part of that.
What is the thing that you're most excited about? It could be Toppers related. It could be in your business. Like you've been in this L&D, universe for a long time, which is a compliment. You're one of our seasoned professionals out there. What are you most excited about in the future? And I don't want to even give you, it could be a shiny new object. It could be a new process. It could be how things are evolving. Like what turns you on and you're like, wow, I want to go into 2022 going that way.
What really has turned me on lately, and it's been dialogues I've been having, especially with colleagues on LinkedIn and some of these group discussions and things like that, is I'm hearing more and more from people. And this is actually how I came to be at Toppers. So I'm something very similar to this, is that you now have organizations who are saying, tell us what to do. And that's actually why I went to Toppers. When I met with my boss, he says, you're going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Sold. I'm coming. That's all I need. And that was literally all I needed to hear from him was he wanted me to come in and help guide him on the best ways. That was truly what I wanted to hear, because he didn't have that mindset of, I'm going to build e-learning courses or you're going to do instructor led. He's like, I want the best ways that improve performance. Here's our measures. You're going to tell me the best way to get there. And I'm seeing more and more of that across a lot of organizations, and especially, after COVID and with the digital transformation, is organizations are now looking at their learning development function saying, skills are turning so rapidly, technology is changing so quickly, you got to tell us, how do we now move forward? And so the ways that you and I grew up in, we don't have 6-9 months to produce a course anymore. We've got to do stuff very quickly, get it out the door, move on to the next thing as quickly as we can, but make sure that we're now providing performance support. So our roles have become that much more valuable and important in terms of, continuous learning improvement, reskilling, upskilling, future skilling, things like that. And so now we have a much broader role looking at the entire ecosystem and what is the impact of these skills and things like that are going to have on the organization, what things are going on once that learner has gained that knowledge in that learner's work ecosystem that is having an impact on them to be able to apply that knowledge and achieve proficiency or competency in the quickest time possible.
In that note, like, how much are you able to draw from other pizza shops? I'm kind of interested in this, because we've got proprietary information, right? There is intellectual property out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, especially for you, you're competing in a commodity essentially, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's only a few ways to make a pizza.
Yes.
And so obviously you're not going out and, taking Domino's, stuff and like just repackaging it and, or Papa John's or whatever. But is there that kind of collaboration? Is there that kind of thing where you can see that, or how, I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah. Within the learning and development function across, especially like we talked about with different pizza chains, there's not a fear to share best practices, what we do, right? Our proprietary stuff. So there's, if somebody's using a certain tool or a certain process, we talk about that, across, different leaders within within this industry. There's always, you want to be very careful of what needs to stay in-house versus what you can share. But there is a lot of sharing of best practices. So from the Domino's down to the Blaze Pizza, or the Jet Pizza, or the up-and-comer, you get these really valuable ideas from very established organizations like a Domino's versus the mom and pop shop who have their own little process. And so everybody brings valuable ideas to the table, and you're like, all right, now I'm creating backlogs, got Post-it notes all over my wall, things that I would like to try in the future based on something I saw.
Cool.
Yeah.
And okay, final question for you here. What is the arc of the opportunity that you have in Toppers? And so again, this is a total, novice question, but is this a 10-year opportunity for you as somebody who's, building out this team and leading it? Is this something where you're like, hey, look, I can see myself doing this for the next 5-10 years? Or is this like really something where you're like, look, this is 2-3 years. I set it up, the processes, and then, there's only so much you can do in the pizza world, or is this like, look, the sky's the limit? I don't know. You never know where it's going to go.
If you had asked me that question before COVID, I probably would have given you a 5-year timeline. You know what I mean? Because you generally would kind of, especially pre-COVID, you would kind of look at things and say, okay, within 5 years, I can get everybody to this place, these things in place, and really help the organization move forward. Post-COVID, I could see me I'm with Toppers for the remainder of my career, because things are changing so rapid, with digital transformation, right? And so technology and use, apps, things like that, overall, you're right. Making a pizza is making a pizza, but of course, you got to be innovative, new menus and things like that, and new culture, leadership culture, management culture. And so because these things are always changing, being close to the front line, understanding those pain points is always presenting the next challenge, and so I have a backlog of challenges already of things that I want to address. I just don't have enough people to really move forward on it. And so you kind of prioritize, and how many can you now group together and move forward on one idea, and the rest of them will come back to that when we have some time, and keep doing that. But there's always, especially once you really get to that point of engagement with your employees and they're contributing back, there's never a shortage of ideas. It's just a shortage of time in terms of being able to address all those things. But I'm fortunate in the sense of they see us moving forward on stuff. And so that has only increased their engagement because they want to share other ideas with us as well. And it's like a great idea. I'm going to get to it as soon as possible. Is what I'm getting used to saying to these leaders and these frontline employees now.
All right. I lied. Just one more question. What's your favorite pizza?
My favorite pizza at Toppers right now is the pesto pizza. So it's a pesto sauce, right, with a different cheese blend. So I can't tell you.
Yeah, can't tell me. I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
And then there's some roasted tomatoes on top. But it's this fresh pizza that is not your typically tomato-based pizza. Yeah. And because it's different, I just love it.
That is awesome, man. Yeah. That sounds. I'm already hungry for lunch. I hope everybody else is. Joe Dunlap, you're the head of learning and development for Toppers Pizza out there in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for just talking to us about setting up this L&D department and sharing your experience with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.